A new ABC Ipsos poll finds that most Americans want President Biden to consider all possible nominees for the Supreme Court. 76% of people surveyed said they'd like Biden to keep his options open, while 23% want him to follow through on his commitment to nominate the first black woman to the Supreme Court.
Republican Senator Lindsey Graham seems to side with that 23%. Graham pushed back on the notion that Biden's nomination was akin to, quote, affirmative action while on cable news Sunday, and said he was in support of making institutions representative of the country. Former press secretary to the Sanders campaign, contributing editor at Current Affairs, and host of the Bad Faith podcast, Brihana Joy Gray, joins us now to discuss. Briahna, welcome.
Thank you, Ryan. It's good to be here.
And a great job last week. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Everything I learned from you, Ryan.
How'd you like it?
It was a lot of fun. It's really great to be there with you, Robbie. It's so nice to be in the studio and around people again. You know, I miss sitting next to you at the Intercept, Ryan, so it was like having a real job again. It was a good time.
We'll definitely have to get you back in again soon. So where do you come down on this question? To me, I think the poll is sort of obvious. I think if you ask somebody, should all people be considered for X job, I think almost everybody's going to say, well, yeah, of course. But that doesn't, I don't think, really tell you much about how they feel about this particular question. But where do you come down?
Yeah, I think if you also framed a poll, do you think it's, odd? Do you think it's a problem that in the 200 plus years of American history, there's never been a black female justices, that there have been X number of white justices and only 2 black justices at all? Do you think it's odd, for instance, that almost no Supreme Court justices has ever hailed from a school other than Harvard or Yale? I think people would have a lot of problems with that, But the reality is, I think that the political vulnerabilities of framing this issue the way that Joe Biden has are pretty obvious for 2 reasons. One, because you're going to have a kind of reaction to this kind of framing that seems to be non-merit based, even though, of course, Joe Biden is saying that of all the meritorious people, and there are many, he will, choose a black woman out of all of those people. But also, the only reason he is doing this is because it is kind of a bare minimum symbolic, superficial gesture that he's making to black voters, to whom he's broken almost every other promise he made to induce them to vote for him during the election cycle. And this promise is cost-free. It doesn't actually change the status quo. It doesn't change the economic hierarchies in this country. It doesn't close the wealth gap. It is meaningful insofar as that potentially this appointee could rule in ways that are advantageous to working class communities, disproportionately communities of color. But given the pedigree on the whole of candidates in the past, and given the fact that the last black person we got wasn't exactly a friend to the interests of the overwhelming majority of black Americans, there is something that is facially empty about this commitment.
Yeah, it seems to me there are, maybe it's not important, but there were a number of ways to avoid this slight criticism he's taking now that this is just like affirmative action or something. He could have said, diversity is important to me. It's important to increase the representation on the Supreme Court, and I'm certainly going to be looking at a black woman, and then just pick one, and that would be it. Instead of the way it's being handled, or already have your person ready to go the second Breyer announces his retirement. I mean, we had to know this was likely coming, and he could have just done a same-day announcement, and then we wouldn't be talking about, well, is he going to, and then it's just done because he's done it.
Well, I would have imagined that for him to make this commitment during the campaign cycle, he would have had someone in mind. Otherwise, he could end up finding himself in a tough situation because it's not an easy process to find a Supreme Court nominee. It's not that there aren't, a lot of qualified jurists of all backgrounds that exist in the country, but there are particular hoops that a Supreme Court justice has to jump through in terms of making sure that they've never said anything that's crossed any line over the entire duration of the career, that they've never ruled on any cases that are going to be unfavorable to the party in charge. And let me remind you that it's not just, the overwhelming influence of the Supreme Court. It's not about these cultural issues that are front of mind when the general public is talking about Supreme Court appointments, abortion, affirmative action, these sorts of things. Senator Whitehouse has been behind really trying to bring attention to the fact that something like, in 9 out of 10 cases that come before the Supreme Court that have to do with actual financial interests, the real things that are moving and shaking and changing how people are living in this country, they overwhelmingly go 5-4 to enriching the financial interests at stake, right? And that is both parties that are committed to that kind of agenda. So, for example, on the episode of my podcast, Bad Faith, that we released today, I interviewed Matt Stoller, who's an expert on anti-monopolies, antitrust, monopoly law, about all the ways that Stephen Breyer, despite being, a liberal lion on the bench, has been a real enemy of competitive practices that are supposed to be put into place through antitrust law. And then this is not a left-right issue, as most things are. It's a top-down issue. So when they're picking these justices, yeah, she might be black, she might be a woman, but odds are that she will toe the line where it's important to toe the line to keep the oligarchy in place.
And you're right. The best way to figure out how a Supreme Court decision is going to come down is to figure out which side the Chamber of Commerce has weighed in on. And if you figure that out, they're going to be there. But I wanted to ask you about Reagan and his promise that he was going to nominate a woman for the Supreme Court. That didn't get the kind of blowback that this is getting. And why do you think that is?
Well, America sometimes has a special relationship with race. I also think that in many instances, conservatives will sometimes not judge their own leadership's commitments to diversity with the same level of scrutiny that it will do for liberals, because there's a little hypocrisy afoot. You see it in the cancel culture game where some conservatives like to call liberals snowflakes, at the same time break down over the idea of a peanut M&M wearing flats, or most recently Minnie Mouse having a commemorative blue pantsuit on in like one series of promotional advertisements, right? And at this, you see it when they are making really bold diversity plays like they did during the RNC in 2020. I think that the Republican slate was maybe more diverse than what you saw at the DNC, and they were explicit about the need for diversity and the value of diversity. It's only when liberals start to speak in those ways that they characterize the interest in diversity as being anti-white and being in the interest of suppressing white men, right? And there's a certain trust that I think Republican voters have of Republican leadership when they make those same kinds of gestures, that's not really what they're about, either because they don't really believe the Republicans are fighting for diversity in that way, or because they simply have a deeper core trust that they will pick the qualified version of the candidate of color, the woman candidate, whereas the liberals won't. But I also do think it's this framing issue. Joe Biden saying, I will absolutely, no matter what context or circumstances, pick a black woman, is going to lead someone down the kind of mental rabbit hole of believing that regardless of what other qualifications there are, what's important first and foremost is that they're black. Whereas to Robbie's point, he could have framed it, I'm going to pick the most qualified candidate in the world, in America. And I believe that of all of those very, very qualified candidates, there are black women among them that should be getting really important scrutiny that they haven't gotten historically for all the reasons that we understand.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think you're right that, Republicans often describe the interest in diversity among Democrats on the left as like reverse racism. But then Republicans, when they manage to do some diversity thing, that's an example of how not racist they are. So it's a double standard with like the Reagan thing, right? He's like, yeah, I'm going to pick a woman, and the Republicans are like, that proves we're not sexist, and Democrats are like, that's great, we want you to pick a woman. So there's no reason for conflict when Republicans do it, as opposed to when Democrats do it.
The old Tim Scott two-step.
That's right. That's right. But it is interesting, and we're just talking about this, right, because this is a very exciting thing. Supreme Court fights are interesting. It's an incredibly important role, and we don't know who it is yet. So what else are we going to talk about? I don't know why you even have this sort of gap where you don't have the person ready to go, but.
Well, it would be nice. I will say it would be nice if we were having a conversation as a community, if voters were more informed about the things that they should be looking at to Ryan's point about the Chamber of Congress. The kind of decisions that are coming down the pike that have an enormous amount of effect on our lived lives, our ability to successfully organize labor, our ability to have proper regulations against anti-competitive practices, and on and on and on down the line. Our election law, a million and one things that have had an enormous impact on our daily lives, but aren't so sexy as Roe v. Wade, and largely go over the public's head because the media isn't talking about it. And I would love it to see Biden pressured to not just pick a black woman, but to pick a black woman who maybe is a public defender instead of a prosecutor, maybe doesn't have a background in corporate law, maybe even didn't go to Harvard or Yale. I don't know.
Yeah. and who, but the reality is has to be someone who never owned a cell phone, never did or said anything controversial or unkind from kindergarten on. Maybe if they did it in preschool, they won't get in trouble for it, but I wouldn't count on that. Honestly, you have to find someone who lived a spotless life to survive a nomination fight at this point, which is kind of crazy to me. But
there's not many heroes, trailblazers, or people that are especially inspiring among folks who have lived spotless lives. So
yeah.
But well-behaved women rarely make history, Robbie.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
And as this has gotten more partisan, though, spots have been allowed. In the past, Brett Kavanaugh would have just been jettisoned. And
that's quite a spot. Yeah.
Right, they would have.
think?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, I don't agree. I think
there are a million Brett Kavanaughs right behind it.
I think in the past that wouldn't have come up. I don't think anyone would have cared. It wouldn't have been made an issue about it. Wasn't when you did something kind of sketchy,
Clarence
bad when you're a teenager. Who cares?
No, yeah, good point on Clarence Thomas. Go ahead, Briahna.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't a teenager most certainly when the accusations by Anita Hill were made, but and others, by the way, others who were silenced and not able to actually bring their claims in the context of his vetting process. But Clarence Thomas certainly did get vetted in the same ways that Justice Kavanaugh was. And it was a huge national media event, and both men made it through. And that could be an argument about. I mean, we'll see if something ever happens like that to a liberal justice and whether or not there's some hypocrisy there. We'll see the extent to which, liberals maybe didn't go as hard in the paint against Justice Thomas as they might have if he weren't black because of some squeaky, ambivalent feelings about whether or not they should be doing this to a black man.
Yeah. And not just liberals, but one particular liberal, the chair of the Judiciary Committee, Joe Biden,
Right.
who told women who were ready to back up Anita Hill's story, no, don't need you testifying. We're just going to run this through, which did change, court history.
Yeah.
Anyway, Briahna, thank you for joining us. Thanks for being here. We have to get you back in this chair very soon.
It's my pleasure. You guys are holding it down okay, though. I believe in you.
Well, we'll have more Rising right after this.